I opened my front door and saw 3 massive Wi-Fi towers bolted to my roof, without my permission, without warning. The sun hadn't even fully risen when I noticed it. Thick black cables snaking down from my roof like mechanical vines, disappearing into a gray utility box I didn't authorize. My stomach dropped. I ran outside barefoot, the gravel biting into my feet. And there they were. 3 oversized humming Wi-Fi repeaters mounted like surveillance equipment on a military outpost. Not discreet, not even remotely tasteful, just industrial tech slapped onto the roof of my personal sanctuary like it was some kind of communications tower. I didn't need to be a network engineer to recognize the model. They were enterprise-grade units, easily capable of covering several square blocks. These weren't installed for convenience. This was infrastructure, and someone had decided my home was the hub. I followed the lines with my eyes until they trailed off my property, running down the side of my house, stapled to the siding like I was nothing more than a utility pole. My fists clenched involuntarily. I found Brad across the street standing on a neighbor's lawn, lecturing a young couple about their mailbox color. Clipboard in hand, aviators on, collared shirt tucked into jeans like he was the sheriff of some HOA fiefdom. When he saw me storming over, he smiled like a parent humoring a whining child. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. There are 3 devices drilled into my roof. Who gave you the right? Brad blinked slowly, then gave a short laugh. Eric, the board approved this months ago. We needed better signal range for the security system. Your house happens to be in the most efficient location. You mean my private residence was repurposed without my consent? I said through clenched teeth. He waved his hand dismissively, as if I was quibbling over recycling bins. It's for everyone's benefit. Besides, the HOA bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph C, give us authority over shared neighborhood assets. My roof is not a shared asset, I snapped. That's your opinion, he said flatly. But the airspace above it? Well, that's technically under community jurisdiction. You signed the agreement when you bought in. There was no anger in his voice, just an oily smugness that made my skin crawl. He believed he was untouchable, that he could twist language and bylaws into weapons. And for the first time since moving in, I realized the neighborhood wasn't mine. It was his, at least for now. The change was subtle at first. A flicker in the kitchen lights, a faint hum that grew louder near the breaker box. But by the end of the second week, the impact was measurable. A $212 jump on my electric bill for the month. That wasn't just inflation or poor insulation. That was someone draining my home like a parasite. I ran diagnostics. The usage spike traced back to a non-native node on my home's main circuit. Those damn repeaters. They ran 24/7, pulling juice from my grid without a single cent of compensation. I brought the evidence to Brad, along with a printed invoice for the added cost. I didn't even ask for much, just reimbursement and a plan to relocate the devices. He scanned the paper like it was a restaurant menu, then grinned without humor. You're part of the HOA, Eric. We share everything here. Then, with a smirk that crawled under my skin, it's called community. That word, community, weaponized. It was the same euphemism corporate managers used when they merged departments and laid off half the staff. I knew this game. Dress coercion in the language of collaboration, and you could make theft look like service. I began to hear murmurs around the neighborhood, overheard conversations cut short when I passed by. One neighbor, Diane, finally confessed under her breath. They put one on our shed too. My husband's furious, but Brad says it's non-negotiable. And yet no one pushed back. They were scared. Or tired. Or maybe they'd accepted this as the price of lawn maintenance and gated entryways. I was the only one making noise, and Brad made sure everyone noticed. I found out later he'd sent an email to the HOA mailing list accusing me of technical hostility and obstructing neighborhood infrastructure. I was being recast not as a victim, but as a rogue element. Then the signal started dying. First, it was intermittent buffering on streaming services. Then Zoom calls dropped. By week 3, my son's online algebra class wouldn't load at all. He sat at the kitchen table in tears, his screen frozen mid-equation. I ran a full trace on my network. The repeaters were now active access points with packet shaping protocols enabled. Brad had installed a management chip, a tiny embedded controller that rerouted and limited bandwidth usage at will. I wasn't just powering the network, I was locked out of it. And Brad? He had given himself full administrative privileges. That night, I sat in the living room lit only by the glow of a disconnected monitor, listening to my son ask if he'd fail the class. That was it. No more emails, no more polite requests, no more patience. Something broke in me, and what replaced it was cold, precise, and calculating. The coldest revenge is never loud. It's silent code, buried deep in firmware, where no clipboard-wielding dictator would ever think to look. Brad thought I was just another IT guy, someone who resets routers and installs antivirus software for his aunt on weekends. He didn't know I write stealth-level networking protocols, the kind deployed on encrypted drones and unmanned subs. I've worked on systems that slip through firewalls like smoke through a keyhole. And I was about to remind him that power doesn't always walk on two legs. It often hides in lines of code. For 48 hours, I barely slept. I wrote a custom patch, injected into the repeaters through a vulnerability he'd left wide open. Rookie mistake. His firmware hadn't been updated in months, and the default admin credentials were still admin123. Within minutes, I had root access. I built a private proxy server with full control. Every device connected through those repeaters was now routed through me. Every gaming console, baby monitor, Amazon Echo, they all passed through a bandwidth governor I designed to emulate 1999 internet speeds. Streaming? Gone. Voice calls? Broken. Smart fridges? Offline and weeping. But I added one exception. A bypass system. If the MAC address matched a paid token, a custom encrypted handshake I installed on my own gear, then speeds stayed lightning fast. For everyone else? Welcome back to the dial-up era. Still, this wasn't about throttling. That was just foreplay. I ran a traffic capture on the proxy for 2 weeks, logged every device, timestamped every login, mapped every byte of data used. Then I ran the numbers, $3,426.19 in bandwidth on my personal fiber plan, a conservative estimate. I didn't just print logs. I designed a full forensic-grade report, clean charts, line graphs, MAC to resident correlations, even heat maps showing which times of day each board member binged Netflix. When the next HOA meeting rolled around, I walked in wearing a pressed shirt, holding a manila folder like it was a detonator. No theatrics, just quiet fury dressed in spreadsheets. "Gentlemen," I said, setting the folder down in the dead center of the oak table. "This is your invoice, due in 15 days, or the neighborhood goes offline." Brad flipped it open, scanning line after line. His knuckles went pale. Sweat bloomed at his collar. One of the board members leaned forward and whispered, barely audible, "Holy crap, he's serious." I didn't blink. "Also, I've sent full copies to the city council, your ISP, and my attorney, just in case." The room fell into a silence so complete you could hear the ceiling fan ticking. For once, Brad had nothing to say. It arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, just my name typed cleanly across the front. Inside was a cashier's check, drawn from the HOA's operating account, with every cent accounted for, $3,426.19 plus $574, labeled as goodwill compensation. No apology, no explanation, just numbers. It was the closest thing to a surrender flag Brad Keller would ever wave. The next morning, a work crew showed up, unannounced but clearly briefed. No eye contact, no small talk. They climbed up to the roof, unscrewed every bolt, stripped the cabling clean, and loaded the repeaters into the back of an unmarked white van. It took less than 30 minutes, like they were erasing evidence. I watched from the front porch, sipping coffee. I didn't wave goodbye. The following week, a revised HOA tech policy landed in my mailbox. It was neutered. Every clause referencing shared infrastructure had been struck out, rewritten in passive voice, legally scrubbed. There were even footnotes citing FCC guidelines. I didn't bother reading the fine print. I already knew who had written it. Fear had a signature style. Brad disappeared just as quietly. No farewell speech, no final patrol. One day he was measuring someone's grass at 6:30 a.m., and the next, his house was dark, blinds drawn, mailbox overflowing. Rumors swirled. Some said he moved to Nevada, that he was working on a community-wide satellite mesh project in the Mojave. Others claimed he'd burned out, gone full prepper in the mountains. Personally, I didn't care. Brad Keller was deleted from the network. But what surprised me was what came after. A man named John, middle-aged, always wore cargo shorts, showed up on my porch with a case of Shinerbach and an embarrassed grin. "Didn't vote for any of it," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Wish I'd spoken up sooner." A few days later, Mrs. Culver from 2 houses down baked me a pie. Others just nodded as I passed, or gave a thumbs up in their rearview mirrors. The same people who once crossed the street to avoid being seen with me now paused to chat, to ask how the legend pulled it off. But I hadn't done it for thanks. I'd done it because someone had to draw the line, because if no one defends their roof, one day they'll come for what's underneath it. Now, there's a small aluminum sign screwed into my fence. It reads, "Unauthorized access will be metered and invoiced. And if you think it's just a joke, go ahead, try me."